Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Codependent Dummy podcast. Today, I'm sitting with Kristin Tand. Kristin is a mental health counselor who loves to cook. She is passionate about helping overwhelmed adults slow down the hustle for perfection and start nourishing themselves in the kitchen. Kristin teaches tips and tricks to get out of your head and into your body, using cooking as a vehicle for living a richer life, while also taking the intimidation factor out of how to cook. Kristin, thank you for coming on.
Hey, Marissa. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm curious to hear, Kristin, how do you define codependency?
Yeah. So I kind of view codependency from a bit of like a compassionate lens, but I feel like codependency is really a very adaptive, or was at some point an adaptive strategy to get your needs met. And then as we go through life, it becomes a little less adaptive. So I can explain a little bit of what I mean by that. I see this as like a childhood development strategy. So if you think about little kids, they're completely dependent on their parents for all their needs. And if a parent isn't able to meet one of those needs, then the kiddo is going to find a way to placate the parent and get those needs met. Mm-hmm. So an example that comes to mind for me is if a parent is really stressed and having a difficult time and really needing that kid to behave and to do well, they might put on that child this need of, I need you to be perfect. I need you to be a good kid and be well behaved to make my life easier because I'm stressed and I don't really know how to deal with it. And so that kid really learns, okay, I have to be good. I have to do things to make it easy for them so that then they can take care of me. And that is a very strategic and intelligent strategy of trying to be perfect and be good and do all the right things so that you get your needs met. And one of the ways that I see this kind of come about with people who are struggling with codependency or are codependent in their adults is that kind of being good or achievement just becomes like out of whack, where you have to achieve and overachieve, and you feel like that's the only way to get needs met, to get attention, if we get really deep, to feel like you're deserving of love. So then when we get to be adults and we have these relationships, whether it be partnerships or like your employer or your friendships or your coworkers, then sometimes it can just be like, oh, I have to be achieving and making sure I get everything accomplished in order for them to like me, in order for me to be on their good side and those kinds of things. And then it becomes like you lose what you need and what you want and what's best for you, because all the focus is making sure that the other person is happy, because that's what you've been trained to feel like that's how you get your needs met.
Right.
So that's kind of a bit of my take on it. Curious your thoughts.
Well, no, you're reminding me, I think I've mentioned this before, but when I was a baby therapist, I worked in community mental health. and how we, as a nonprofit or like funded by the government mental health provider, we had to bill hours and we had to meet a certain quota. So we had to be face to face with a patient or their family. It was 28 billable hours per week. We were only supposed to work 40 hours a week, but you can't bill 28 hours and only work 12 more. It just, we were driving everywhere. We're writing notes. We have meetings. Like, it's really like a 60-hour week. And Kristin, being codependent in that environment, I easily met my quota because I was codependent with my patients and their families. I was codependent with my supervisor and the agency.
Yes.
And I actually remember we had a meeting where they had tallied everyone's hours from like the previous quarter. And I was number one. And it was ridiculous, the gap between me and number two. And I was being codependent. It fueled that, Kristin. But then I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh my God, they're going to think I'm lying. They're going to think I've made these hours up because it was so astronomical.
Yes.
How much I was working.
Yeah.
But it was real. But then I was worried that I would be caught or found out as this fraud because I really did think I was a fraud and I was working so hard to disprove that. But then I would prove it in my attempt to disprove it. So
yes, what a quagmire, right? Like, it's just this vicious cycle of, and I bet were you encouraged or praised or given like this is, like what Marissa's doing is kind of what everyone was striving to do? Like, were you told like, this is great? Like,
oh, totally. Yeah. There was no like, Marissa, you need to slow down. This is too much. Are you sleeping? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you getting sufficient nutrition? No, like it was obvious I was neglecting my needs and it came out in different ways. But then, the benefit to the agency trumped. Yeah,
exactly.
What was impacting me.
Exactly. I mean, and that's, I think, one of the trickiest parts about codependency is that it's so external facing and it gets reinforced and encouraged because it makes other people's lives easier. And then it makes you feel good, like you're doing the right thing because you get this feedback that, oh, they like that when I do that. They like it when I'm working 60-hour weeks and I stay late after work to get all my paperwork done and I'm always on time, and you're making all this money for the agency because you're seeing so many clients. And I'll just put out there, I 100% like see you and have had a similar experience. When I worked in community mental health, I kept getting promoted. They were like, oh, do you want to now supervise other counselors because you're so efficient? And then it was even to the point where they were like, we would love for you to move into maybe starting to train to be like the director of this agency. So my overachievement, and this, comes from my own codependency and overachievement, is that it just skyrockets you into promotions and getting higher and higher reinforcement.
Right.
But I love that you brought up that you felt like you were a fraud and you were going to be found out, because scratch the surface of all that, and underneath you feel like you're not doing it right. You're trying to show them that you're not a fraud and you're that you aren't who you feel on the inside, which is really inadequate. And like, I don't know about you, but I often felt like I was a little kid pretending to be an adult. Like, I'm pretending to be a competent counselor. I'm pretending to be like this functioning adult that has it all together. Whereas underneath, you just don't feel that way.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of your experience, do you want to expand on that or share about another codependent experience or relationship from your own life?
Yeah. So I'm already launching in, right, to my experience in my employment. And, I know you've talked about this in your podcast, and I agree with it that codependency just floats through all relationships and all experiences. And I was reflecting with my husband about the start of our relationship and how this kind of floated into the start of our relationship. So when I met my husband, we live in the Pacific Northwest. I'm up here in Portland, Oregon. And it's very outdoorsy up here in the Pacific Northwest. Everybody hikes and backpacks and all that kind of stuff. And he is no exception. And I was, I did a little bit of hiking here and there, but it wasn't like my main jam at the time. But I met him, and I, was on his social media, and he was like doing these crazy mountain climbs and hikes. And I was like, oh gosh, if he's going to like me, like, I got to get on board with this. Like, I have to like, he's not going to like be attracted to me if I'm not doing these things that he's doing. So he invited me to go on a hike, and I went on this hike, and he's like, oh, she can hike. And here's my overachiever. I'm like, I will hike if it kills me. And so then he invites me on a second hike. So we go on the second hike, and it continues to go well. And then by our fifth date, he was like, hey, do you want to climb this mountain? And I was like, sure. So I end up climbing a mountain. It's, it's not like Mount Rainier or something like that, which is like a really high peak, but it was like a 10,000 foot mountain that I climbed with this guy.
Wow.
And so my overachiever was willing to put aside like what was working best for me and what was, my body was okay. I was in my 20s and I was able to do that. But all for the sake of feeling like I have to do what he likes and what he thinks is fun in order to have this guy like me and stay in relationship with me. And we laughed about this because he could care less if I was hiking. He was just really enjoying spending time with me and just wanted to do things with me outside. But it took years in my own work to get to that point of, owning that. And I came to a place where I'm like, yeah, I don't really like mountain climbing, but I still like hiking and I like backpacking, but I do it more for my own sake and not to keep up with him. But I thought that'd be a, pretty good example of overachievement gone astray.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, going back to your definition, right? An adaptive strategy that, okay, like in order to stay attached or to be attached with this individual, with a potential partner, I will set my needs aside to eventually get my need for attachment met. But I will do things and activities that in reality I have very little interest in doing.
Right. That the staying in the relationship or feeling like I wanted to be enough or good enough for this person was the top priority at that time. Not listening to what my body needed or what I was interested in, or sharing my gifts and skills and that being good enough. So yeah, it's a vicious cycle.
Right. And going back to your skyrocketing into promotions and being reinforced in communal health, how did that end?
Right? How did I leave? That ended in
what did your codependency collision look like?
So at that point, you were talking about your 20 hours a week productivity needs. So I was having a caseload, supervising, running staff meetings, and having my director trying to mentor me up into this leadership position. And I had this little light bulb go on of like, wait a second, I thought I wanted to be a counselor, not all these other things, as well as some burnout showed up. And burnout for me was, I started having a lot of like physical chronic pain that happened, a lot of fatigue, just dreading going into work and just feeling out of alignment. And so deciding to pivot and go into my own practice. So I left agency and went into my own practice. And I'd like to say that that magically just kind of shifted all my codependency things. But what it actually did was make me a really effective entrepreneur and business leader in my own business for a while,
Right.
which led me into another lesson and overachievement, and like how that can show up time and time again, because you can change your environment, but if you're not addressing kind of what's underneath, it's just going to keep following you. So yeah, I went into my own practice and built that up really fast because I'm an overachieving codependent person. And then, flash forward 8 years and COVID hit, and we all got depleted in our energy and time. And I realized that codependency was showing up in the therapy room with my clients too, as it does. And that I needed to start focusing on what a good balance was between me and being a therapist. So that led me to this idea of what is nourishing, what feels good to me. And one of my passions is cooking. So one of the things that brings me back to feeling centered and grounded in my body is when I'm in the kitchen and doing things with my hands, not doing things just with my head.
Right.
So I started reducing how much effort I was putting into my business and deciding to do more around nourishing myself. Well, I'll say, so I decided to kind of shift priorities and start seeing like what would feel more imbalanced and what would feel more nourishing for me professionally. And that was to have some variation in kind of like how I was helping others. So instead of just helping others in talk therapy, I'm now pivoting to see if I can help others come back to themselves and their bodies through cooking than just in the therapy room.
Yeah. All right. So I want to get to that, but before we do, in your experience, in your clinical work, how do you sense codependency leads to overfunctioning and neglecting self-care?
Yeah. Well, kind of similar to what I'm talking about of like everything's so external and outward focusing, like wanting to get validation from other people, you start to kind of seek that out in order to feel good about yourself. So, as like we were talking about, where you got a lot of praise for working as hard as you did in your community mental health agency, and I got a lot of praise for doing that too. But you don't get much praise for making your annual doctor's appointment or cooking yourself breakfast every day or getting your laundry done. There's like zero outside reinforcement for that. It all comes from inside. And if the main goal when you're codependent is to stay in a relationship and achieve to feel good about yourself, it doesn't feel good just to achieve all those self-care things. So they often just get neglected. And I've talked with a lot of, I'll say a lot of women in general who are killing it professionally, like they're like CEOs, CFOs doing all these amazing things, but they come home and there's zero food in the refrigerator. Their mail is stacked up in piles because they're too overwhelmed to go through it. You open a drawer in their house and it's stuffed full of things. There's all this self-care stuff is on the back burner because it's just doesn't feel as good. It's not as important.
Right. And besides empty fridges, stuffed drawers, and unopened mail, what else does overfunctioning in the external world and neglecting self-care, what else does that look like day to day?
Day to day. Well, one of the things that I talk about and that I notice is not cooking at home, not cooking for yourself, not knowing how to cook. I was talking with one person, and I don't know if this is what you're asking about, but I'll give an example. I was talking with one person who, growing up, she was in extracurricular sports. So she was on the swim team, and she would go to school, go to swim practice 7 days a week. Well, she wouldn't go to school 7 days a week, but on the weekends she would have meets and races and things like that. So her entire focus was about racing, getting faster, and that's what her parents were reinforcing. And you need to do these extracurriculars and be good at and all that stuff. So she was never at home learning the basics, day-to-day things like how to boil water, how to I'm trying to think of other examples. She told me that when she went to college, she got to college and she didn't know the first thing about cooking, and she didn't even know how to boil water. That was like foreign to her.
Right.
It was new to her. I'm curious for you, what basic self-care things you notice in your life that have gotten neglected from your own codependency,
Mm,
if anything.
yeah. Well, just reflecting back to that time, I think that exercise was not always a priority, or if it was, I was losing sleep to work out. And I was very disciplined, like at the height of my codependency professionally, in meal prepping and like bringing food, but that's because I got a lot of praise for it. So I couldn't disappoint people and not bring my like healthy lunch sack. So it's for me, but yeah, it was also for my reputation. But yeah, I do remember like binging after a long day or a long week. So it wasn't necessarily that I was getting nourished. So yeah, I think I would lose sleep to work out. I would present as being healthy and disciplined, but then seek comfort in food after like long, excruciating weeks. I remember always like wanting to get a pedicure, wanting to get a massage, but like not having time. Yeah, like rarely cooking for myself. And I think I was just really undisciplined. Yeah, with the basics, laundry. I think I was okay with hygiene, but I wouldn't be surprised if like again, after a long day, like I was just too tired to shower, which showers are lovely. Like who wouldn't want to shower? But it's just, yeah, after a really late night, I just wanted to pass out. So, and then, yeah, the chronic pain just going on unaddressed for too long. And then having to play defense with acupuncture, the chiropractor. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up exercise, either not having the energy to exercise or using exercise for something other than body movement to make your body feel good. That exercise is like a means to an end. It's to, getting focused on certain numbers, or focused on how many workouts, or focused on having it to lose weight or to do those kinds of things. And that sometimes that drive, that focus for it to be so regimented that it becomes like out of whack and you end up hurting yourself. And I was also curious, as you were saying, like you were craving pedicures and massages, of like these things that are like to take care of you or to slow down and have someone tend to you. Like it's like we are craving having some like slowness, some nourishingness, some being taken care of, and kind of wanting that from the outside, not knowing how to do that from the inside out.
Right. Yeah. No clue. No clue whatsoever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, we are getting to it, but your thoughts on the long-term impact of basic self-care being neglected long-term?
Yeah. So, the things we were talking about with just the long-term impacts around, on the outside and professionally, everything looking really good, on the inside, not. I also think that, and I guess I touched on this a little bit, but coming back to like these feelings of shame and imposter syndrome, I think the long-term effects are, you on the outside look like you are so competent, and people really are drawn to that and they encourage it, and you get moved up quickly into these roles. But inside there's like a lot of shame around not feeling like you're competent. You're trying, like you were saying earlier, trying to prove to everybody that you are, but that feeling isn't on the inside. And I think one of the long-term impacts is just a lot of what shows up as anxiety, like nervousness, insecurity, not feeling comfortable in your own skin, and trying to prove to everybody that you are when you're not. So that's one thing, feeling like you have to be a grown-up, but you don't feel like a grown-up. You feel like a kid in a grown-up's body kind of thing. Another impact that I see is that it fostering dependence on partners to do some of those basic things. I talk with and have met several people who they kind of chose their partners partially because their partners could take care of all of those household things for them. So that they don't have to really like slow down and do that. Or if they don't know how to do it, then the partner can do it for them. So that it kind of creates even more codependency and dependency on the partner to be that one to take care of the household stuff.
Right.
I talk with a lot of women about, I kind of married my partner because he does the cooking, he does the cleaning. And I talk with a lot of other people who struggle with that with their partners, that they don't maybe do like the cleaning around the house. But sometimes when you're so busy achieving on the outside, it's nice to have someone at home to take care of all that stuff for you. But there's always like you're just hustling over and over and over again for something that you're never reaching. You never get to that place of satisfaction and like calm.
Right. And so potentially someone's burned out, fatigued, they're in chronic pain, right? They're at some codependent catastrophe. What are the ways cooking can bring a codependent back to their body and focus their attention on their own self-nourishment?
I'm glad you asked. Well, I feel like eating food by its very nature is nourishment. We have to eat food in order to survive and to thrive. But how we get that food into our bodies makes a big difference. So, if we're super exhausted at the end of the day, we get on DoorDash, we get some food delivered to our house, we eat that numbly while binging on some shows, and then we go to bed and get up and do it all over again. Yes, you have food in you to get through the next day, but the process of that was all inside of a lot of numbness and not nourishing. It's just a means to an end. So I feel like cooking is a process of taking time to slow down that very thing that you're wanting, that you don't know how to get, and to do it straight for yourself. And you get the reward at the end of having something that tastes good that you can eat and slow down and enjoy. And it's also, it's a very sensory experience. Cooking is, if you think about it, like you're seeing the ingredients that you're cooking with, you're touching everything because you have to prep it, you're smelling the smells, you're hearing the sounds, and then you're tasting it at the end. So like basically our body is just made up of our five senses. So cooking is a way to come back to your body just through your senses in general. You're having to do that. And there was, for a lot of us, there was a time when someone cooked for us, and that was a sense of nourishment. And it's really hard when we're adults and if we don't have someone cooking for us. Cooking for yourself can be a bit of that, having a relationship with yourself and coming back to you and taking care of yourself the way that someone either did or you wished took care of you as a child. So it can be a little bit of like a reparenting, coming back to your body and cooking. But with that said, if you don't know how to cook, it can be a very overwhelming experience. And I talk with a lot of people that hate cooking, and they hate going into their kitchen. So, I just hold a lot of compassion for that, because, we come from a lot of different backgrounds, and some people had two working parents and never ate at home, or they weren't taught, or they had no interest. It's not their passion. So there's a lot of just barriers to coming back to yourself and your body through cooking. But I'm hoping to offer some resources for that.
Yeah. So let's say someone's like, all right, Kristin, I'll try it. I will try cooking to nourish myself. What are the initial steps you take with your cooking coaching clients to combat codependency through cooking?
Yeah, well, I am a counselor that loves to cook. So I, kind of approach this coaching through a two-step process. So the first step, I feel like, is around awareness and understanding what is holding you back from cooking. There's a lot of different things that go into that. When someone's like, okay, I'll try it, my first question is like, well, tell me the reasons you don't want to try it. Tell me the reasons you hate cooking. And, one of that might be what we were just talking about. Is this purely a lack of skills? Is this because you've been focusing just on external validation, and you don't know how to do this, or someone's never taught you, or it wasn't what was reinforced and encouraged? Let's just understand that without judgment. This is kind of just from like a curiosity standpoint. Or is this like from a place of shame or embarrassment? Like, I should know how to do this. I'm, 28 years old. I should be able to like poach an egg, like, which, by the way, it's really hard to poach an egg. I don't think a 28-year-old should be able to poach. Maybe scramble. Like, maybe that's a little bit more accurate. Like, I should be able to scramble an egg. But like, again, it's a skill just like everything else, like, if you weren't taught, we can't learn how to cook through like osmosis or telepathy. This isn't something that's just like put into our brains. We have to learn how to do it. So kind of dismantling a bit of that shame and embarrassment around it, and the expectations of where you think you're supposed to be at. Or is it something else? Is it a fear of failure? Is it fear that you're going to spend all this time making something, and at the end it's going to taste bad, and you're going to feel like you messed it up, and you spent all this time for what? For nothing,
Right.
Or, feeling like you're the only one. I think a lot of us feel like everyone else, this is, easy for them. They don't even think about it. What's wrong with me? And feeling very alone, like they are the only ones. So first of all, just kind of dismantling and understanding what those pieces are. And then the second is, after you have the awareness, then address, how to take some small steps towards doing something different. So if it is about building skills, okay, then what would it be like to have someone teach you like how to use a knife, and like how to chop some things up, or how to put together a grocery list, or how to read a recipe, or how to adjust a recipe? Like, all of those things are things that can be taught and learned. If it's about shame, working on some of those thoughts that you have about feeling bad about yourself, feeling critical, questioning that a little bit, offering some understanding and some kindness, seeing where that came from. And, if it's other things, like not like feeling really alone, like how can you create some community around this? How can you have other people, what would it be like if you were to cook with someone instead of just being like, okay, I'm by myself again, coming home from work, and I'm going to cook myself dinner. This isn't fun. This is lonely. So is there a way to bring some people into it to make it fun instead of it being this chore? Because
Right.
that's no fun for it to just be a chore.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bit of what I encourage is one, understanding, and two, little baby steps towards something different, and just see
Right.
what happens. See if that encouragement from the inside out and slowing down can feel better and more nourishing than just running the marathon and running the hustle race of trying to be good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm curious your thoughts on their a main objection to cooking, right? They're burnt out, they're wanting change, but I sense like one of my issues when I was in my, like just worst period of my codependency was I don't have time, right? So I want change. I want to build boundaries around my time.
Yeah.
But cooking takes so much time, Kristin. Like I don't have time to do that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and I think we can all relate to that to some extent of time is precious and energy is precious and everything's pulling on us and pulling on our time. So that might be a starting place, kind of around awareness of let's talk about what is taking your time and how we're spending that time. And seeing like, is it that there is no time, or is it the approach that you have to the ways that you spend time? So like, how much time are you spending at work and the reasons why you're spending all that time at work? Is
Right.
that because you're trying to chase this goal of achievement? And how is that going? What would it be like to turn off the computer, like maybe even 20 minutes or half hour, and not get that task done? What would happen if you don't get that task done and it sits till tomorrow and you go home and you spend that 20 minutes or 30 minutes doing something different? And then tomorrow you go back to that task. Will the deadline pass and you'll lose that client, or you'll lose that job, or you'll lose, what will happen? What's the fear there?
Mm.
I'm also wondering too of sometimes I think we stay busy because there's a secret benefit to staying busy than to slow down. And sometimes staying busy keeps us away from some uncomfortable feelings or some uncomfortable thoughts, or facing some change or things like that. And that's real. And that I can honor that, because busyness I know for me, it served a great purpose for a long time, because I didn't have to sit still and think about things and like sit with things.
Right.
But then it just got me to burnout. So very slowly starting to decrease some of that busyness and starting to sit with some of those feelings and see like, well, what does feel good? And I mean, with cooking, I'm not going to encourage someone to be like, you can only, like robotically, you can only cook at home in your dinners now. I'm wondering, like, what would it be like to cook like one meal, maybe in a month, maybe on like a weekend when you have some time, where you carve out like a little like me date, like a little date, or for you and someone else, to just try something new and different and just see what it feels like. Maybe it'll feel awful, or maybe it'll feel like, well, okay, I'm doing something new and different, and that's maybe uncomfortable, but I'm doing something for me to nourish what's best for me. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Just really, I don't know. Overall, whatever the objection, it sounds like your work is really around understanding, bringing awareness, and trying to help your clients reflect on like what's underneath that objection. And yeah, can it be addressed through teeny tiny boundaries and small steps to start out?
To start out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And last question with your cooking coaching clients. What if they channel their codependency with you or with cooking, right? And they just, I don't know, become this all-star chef. Have you witnessed that? Or how do you sense you would attempt to combat codependency in the work that they do with you?
Yeah, oh, that's such a great question. And maybe it's coming from because you've seen this and I've seen this of it goes everywhere, right? So I think I, might kind of try to help you turn that and to say, is this for you and nourishing you, or is this to get the gold star that you feel like you're supposed to be a certain type of chef or a certain type of cook, or that you're trying to please me or be kind of the star student kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of, I wouldn't want that to be too confrontational, it's not where but just kind of gently drawing some awareness to that of how can this be a little bit more about what's going to feel good in you and your body, and not so much about I'm doing this for someone else or for something else.
Right.
Because this isn't really about being the best cook. This is about using cooking to slow down and to just take some time for you. And maybe that would be if someone slowed down, took some time for themselves, and they're like, I just don't like cooking. That would still be a success, because it'd be like, okay, you just slow down and kind of checked in with yourself, and that this isn't for you. You know what I mean? But that would be different than I feel like a fraud and I feel like I can't do this because I have to do all these other things and get all these other things done outside of me.
Right.
It's kind of like an internal awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is hard. It's hard to develop. So I think as therapists, as coaches, it's so hard, because of course we want people to follow the program or, complete whatever modules in whatever class we're teaching or something. But then, trying to be mindful of, is this for you, or is this the gold star? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You're reminding me, I have a mentor and she loves going to farmers markets and buying flowers on Sundays and cutting them and putting them, in little vases all over her house. And she told me, and I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds so cute. Right? Just picturing myself going to a farmer's market and buying flowers and cutting them up and putting them around the house. It's so Instagram friendly and self-care. Look at me buying flowers. And I'm flowers. And they died in a couple days. And my husband was like, why'd you get flowers? They just die. I know, but my mentor, it just sounded so nice. And thankfully, upon reflection, some people love to do that. I know people. I mean, my mentor, and then I have a sister-in-law. She has a talent for arranging flowers. She loves to do this as a hobby. Yeah. But I did it, and thankfully I was able to recognize buying flowers and arranging them around my house is not nourishing for me. But I did try it first.
But you had to try it first. And now I mean, I guess it's not as a complex a skill, but maybe now you know that you can get flowers and you can cut them and you can put them in vases around your house if you wanted to. Yeah. It's but you're like, is this for me? Is this nourishing for me, or is something else gonna be what's
is it look, mentor, look what I did. I did the same thing you did. Don't you love me so much? I'm so worthy, aren't I?
Right. Yep. Yeah. So keeping that in mind for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess you could buy more flowers even though they died. But that's a lot of time and effort. Mm-hmm. Maybe something else is more fun.
Right. For me. Other people love flowers that, all flowers eventually die. No shit. But really, to each their own. And it's up to us as codependents to find what is our own.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm similar than that in that I really want to be a houseplant person, like you were talking about Instagram, that everybody's like they have Instagram pages for their houseplants. And I can't keep them alive for the life of me. They get diseases. I mean, I even have plants out of screen right now that are half dead. So it's yeah, to each their own. But that's a good point that you're doing it for somebody else. Instagram, case in point, it wouldn't be for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Final thoughts on cooking, nourishment, codependency, self-care.
No, I think that's a good spot.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kristin, for coming on. And if people are curious to learn more about you, what are you offering the listeners?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for having me on, Marissa. I really appreciate it. Been following your podcast for a while, and I love your messages for your listeners. So on the note of reflection and awareness, I have a free private podcast and a reflection workbook called Cooking with Clarity, where folks can hear my top 4 reasons that keep people out of the kitchen, and then ways that they can overcome that and do a little reflection for themselves to kind of see where they're at with cooking. So you can, folks can find that at my website, inthekitchenwithkristin.com.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So workbook, private podcast, and thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marissa.
Mm-hmm. Okay, everyone, we'll see you next week. Hey girl, it's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster, I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at therapywithmarissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy, and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please find one.